And and so it's important to take each moment to love and to have the perspective of things being big or small, of seasons passing, of the perspective that uh, honesty is the best policy, and that if there is an advantage to be gained by being dishonest, it may not really be the advantage you want in the bigger picture. I have seen so many shows and heard so many scenarios in which dishonesty is presented as being the kinder thing to do. But I really don't think it is, because what you begin to do when you're trying to take the pain out of a moment by being dishonest, what you're creating is an artificial world, so that all you've done is transfer the pain from that moment to another moment where the person has to deal with the fact that what they're living with is an illusion and not a reality. If we can train ourselves, equip ourselves, educate ourselves to deal with honest truth, then it is always better to know, what am I really dealing with here? And to recognize that it has pros and cons. Every situation has pros and cons. Whether a situation is good or bad comes back to this question of what's the perspective. For the one who wins the game, the perspective is that we had a great game. To the one who loses the game, the perspective is that it was terrible. Everything went wrong. I was really off today. My muscles were sore. I got a cramp in my arm. Any number of things. The challenge of our multidimensional reality is that both are equally true, because truth is very contextual. And that's part of perspective too. You can't really talk about perspective without identifying the context. It's because it's the context that gives a perspective. And most of us go through life each day looking at, dealing with things, doing things, and not really paying a lot of attention to the pieces and parts and constitutive elements of what it is we're dealing with. I drive a car every day, but I couldn't tell you the first thing about how to fix the engine. I pick up the telephone, but I have no idea where that wire really goes. I imagine it goes underneath the ground and downtown someplace to some big office building where there's complicated computers and equipment, and then somehow it goes from there through thousands of miles of phone line and communicates with something on the other side of the planet in seconds. It's almost too much to comprehend. But I use it every day without necessarily understanding it. There's a perspective that understands all the wires, and there's a perspective that doesn't. And in this specific case, I more often have this perspective that doesn't understand, but still utilizes that thing. Part of living life and becoming all of who and what I can be, and the same as for each of us, is becoming more aware of how multidimensional our lives are and how many other perspectives overlap and intersect with ours. So that when I'm winning, does somebody else have to lose? Or is there a perspective from which we could do an activity in which everybody was a winner and nobody was a loser? And I've often said to some of my friends, it's not over until everybody wins. Because growing up in a Roman Catholic environment and going to Catholic school for 6 years, one of the first things I learned from the nuns was this basic understanding of interconnection, this perspective that everything is interconnected, and we're not all separate beings that have no bearing on each other, but that everything I do has an effect on those around me, and everything they do potentially has an effect on me. I have to decide how to respond to that effect, to respond to what they contribute to my life. But I can't decide what they will contribute to my life, only how I respond to it. And so, but there are people who have the perspective that whatever somebody does to you is actually done to you. And, well, I did this, of course, because. Well, you did it because. But the of course is really kind of conditional, because there is a typical way that people respond to a certain action. If somebody slaps you on the face, the typical response might be to get angry. There may be somebody who chooses a different response because there are other responses that are possible, but they're probably not going to happen by accident, only by intention. When you train yourself to respond to any great or small action of violence in a peaceful way, you can steer the situation in a very different direction. When somebody slaps you, instead of slapping them back, to calmly and directly, or as calmly as you can, to say, "And what did you mean by that? If there's something you want me to understand, let's talk about it." That, of course, is my approach. But there are some people who don't do as well with talking or with communicating. They want to, their language, if you will, their perspective is that communications happen more by gestures than by words. That you can say any words and they may or may not mean anything. And that's true to some extent. But I think there's enough to be gained by choosing the nonviolent responses, because from a nonviolent response, you can move to positive places much more easily than from a violent response. If violence happens and you answer it with violence, we have a cycle of violence going on, and it becomes very difficult to step out of that and say, what are we fighting about anyway? Why can't we be friends? Because ultimately we probably both want similar things. We just haven't figured out how to come up with a solution where everybody gets what they need or what they want. Or to take that perspective of stepping back for a moment and saying, is what I want really good for me? That's another perspective. One of the perspectives I had in Catholic grade school was that if someone brought a candy bar to class, for example, and one of the nuns noticed that this person had a candy bar, they would basically instruct them, did you bring enough for everybody? If you didn't, then put it away. It has no place here. They were always emphasizing how we needed to be inclusive, and that if one person was going to enjoy something sweet, then everybody should have the same chance. It's not about one person being better than another or worse, or one person deserving it or another person not.